Hi, this is part 2 of the William Bonin episode, so if you have not listened to episode 1 yet, please go back. Where I last left off, it was 1979, and Bonin was picked up from jail by his pervert friend, Mr. Fraser, and said, "No one's going to testify again. This is never going to happen to me again." He only got out of jail because of a clerical error. This error was a death sentence to 21 young men. I also introduced you to 21-year-old Vernon Butts, 17-year-old William Pugh, 19-year-old Gregory Miley, and 18-year-old James Munro. All but Monroe met each other at one of the many parties that Bonin or Mr. Fraser had and became friends. So, let's get started. Hi, it's Eve. I don't have much to say except that I'm sorry for the laundry room noises in the background and my dogs as usual, but I think I have come up with a solution and I will try it on the next episode. And I also have a really cool announcement that I will make as soon as I receive some pictures from the person I asked to receive them from. So let's get into these murders now. It was 1979, and Gregory Miley and Vernon Butts became good friends with Bonin, and they loved to hear his stories about his many sexual sadistic escapades, and became also sexual buddies with him. Oh, and I do need to add that me saying Bonin and or Bonin interchangeably still applies. Over time, Butts became enamored with Bonin and was excited by the stuff that he talked about. And once Bonin told him that he wanted to go murder, Butts leapt at the opportunity to become Bonin's first accomplice. Together, they would prowl the highways of Southern California in Bonin's van. We are now going to go through each murder. Victim number 1, May 28, 1979, Thomas Glenn Lundgren, a 13-year-old boy who was hitchhiking, was abducted by Bonin and Butts. He was sodomized, bludgeoned on his face and head, causing multiple skull fractures. He had been slashed across the throat and stabbed numerous times, emasculated, then strangled to death. His body, only in a t-shirt, shoes, and sock, was found that same afternoon. His underwear, jeans, and severed genitals were discovered thrown around in a field close to his body. Victim 2. On August 4th, 1979, a 17-year-old named Mark Shelton left his house to walk to a movie theater. He was abducted by Bonin and Butts. Mark Shelton's neighbors heard screams near his house around the time Mark left, so it was likely he was abducted just outside of his home. He was sodomized. Foreign objects, one being a pool cue, forced into his rectum, which caused his body to go into shock and die. His body was dumped at Cajun Pass. Victim 3. The following day, August 5th, a 17-year-old boy named Marcus Grabs was hitchhiking. He was abducted by Bonin and Butts and was bound with cord and ignition wire. They drove Marcus to Bonin's home, where he was sodomized, beaten, and repeatedly stabbed. They discarded his nude body in Malibu Creek. When his body was found the next morning, an investigator compared the injuries upon Marcus to that of a rabid dog, unable to determine when to stop biting. Marcus was stabbed 77 times. Remember from episode 1, Bonin's neighbors suspected something wasn't right, and that one neighbor remembers a frightful sound coming from the house one night and wrote it off as kids playing. I bet she heard the screams of this 17-year-old Marcus. Victim number 4. On August 27th, a 15-year-old boy named Donald Ray Hayden was walking along Santa Monica Boulevard around 1 a.m. when he was abducted by Bonin and Butts. Donald was bound, sodomized, bludgeoned, throat-slashed, and partially castrated, all before being strangled to death with a ligature. Donald's body was found by construction workers later the same morning in a dumpster located near the off-ramp of the Ventura Freeway. Victim number 5. On September 9th, a 17-year-old boy named David Louis Murillo was riding his bike to the movie theater when he encountered Bonin and Butts. David Murillo was lured into Bonin's van. He was then bound, repeatedly sodomized, his head bashed in with a tire iron, then strangled to death with a ligature. His nude body was thrown over an embankment alongside Highway 101. Victim number 6. On September 17th, an 18-year-old young man named Robert Christopher Wirostek was riding his bike to his grocery store job when Bonin abducted, sodomized, and strangled him to death. His body was dumped along Interstate 10, where it was found on September 27th. Victim number 7. On or about November 1st, Bonin and Butts abducted and murdered an unidentified young man. This victim was savagely beaten, sodomized, an ice pick shoved into his nostrils and ear, and strangled to death. His body was discarded in an irrigation ditch alongside State Route 99 south of Bakersfield. He, to this day, remains a John Doe. Bonin later estimated the age of this victim to be 23. He was approximately 5'10" in height. Victim number 8. In late November, Bonin abducted a 17-year-old boy named Frank Dennis Fox. His body was found on December 2nd alongside the Ortega Highway. The body told the story of what he went through. He had extensive blunt force trauma to the face and head and ligature marks on the wrists and ankles, indicating Frank had been bound throughout his ordeal. No clothing or other identifying evidence was discovered at the scene. Victim number 9. In early December, Bonin abducted John Frederick Kilpatrick, a 15-year-old boy who was leaving his parents' home to go hang out with friends. John was strangled to death, then his body was dumped in a remote area of Rialto. His body was found on December 13th. John Kilpatrick remained a John Doe until August 5th, 1980, which was 8 months later. Victim number 10. We are now into 1980, specifically January 1st, 1980, when a 16-year-old boy named Michael Francis McDonald was abducted by Bonin. He was brutalized and strangled to death. His fully clothed body was found alongside Highway 71 2 days later, but he remained a John Doe until March 24th, almost 3 months later. And I suppose he probably sodomized every victim, even if it does not say so. Victim number 11. On February 3rd, 1980, Bonin had a new accomplice, Gregory Miley. The pair drove from Downey to Hollywood with the specific intention of committing a murder. They picked up a 15-year-old boy named Charles Miranda, who was hitchhiking close to the Starwood nightclub along Santa Monica Boulevard. According to Miley, Bonin and Charles had consensual sex in the rear of the van and also in his rear end. Sorry, that was inappropriate. Let me start over. Miley said that Bonin and Charles had consensual sex in the back of the van as Miley aimlessly drove. Then Bonin whispered to Miley, "Kid's going to die." Miley pulled over, and then he and Bonin overpowered Charles and bound him. Bonin asked the boy how much money he had in his possession. When Charles responded he had about $6, Bonin ordered Miley to take the boy's wallet, then this time sodomized him. Miley also attempted to sodomize the boy, but was unable to sustain an erection. In frustration, Miley assaulted Charles with various sharp objects before assisting Bonin in bludgeoning the boy. Bonin then strangled Charles with his t-shirt and a tire iron as Miley repeatedly jumped on Charles's chest. Miley would later say he heard a bunch of bones cracking as Bonin had pressed a tire iron against the boy's neck and that the boy vomited. Miley then jumped down on him, killing the boy. His nude body was dumped in an alleyway alongside East 2nd Street in Los Angeles. My guess is that Gregory Miley was exceptionally brutal to 15-year-old Charles because he was ashamed and angry at himself because he couldn't get or hold an erection and took out the disgust and anger in himself out on poor Charles. Victim number 12. Just 5 minutes after the pair had discarded Charles's body, Bonin told Miley, "I'm horny again. Let's go and do another one." A few hours later, the pair saw 12-year-old James McCabe at a bus stop. James was lured into Bonin's van willingly on the promise that they would drive him to his intended destination, which was Disneyland. Unfortunately, James never made it there. According to Miley, Bonin drove to a grocery store parking lot, parked the van, told Miley to drive, and then went into the rear of the van. Miley would later say that as he drove, he continually heard James crying as Bonin beat and sodomized him, then forced the boy to sleep in his arms. Miley soon joined Bonin in beating the child and crushing his neck with a tire iron simply because he felt like doing so. Bonin then strangled James to death with his own t-shirt. They discarded his fully clothed, beaten, and sodomized body alongside a dumpster in the city of Walnut, where it was found 3 days later. After these two back-to-back murders, the cold-hearted duo worked up an appetite, so they used the money that they stole to buy themselves lunch. On February 4th, Bonin was arrested for violating conditions of his parole. He was in custody at the Orange County Jail until March 4th. I don't know what his parole violation was, but it was probably for something minor as he was released within a month. Victim number 13. On March 14th, 18-year-old Ronald Gatlin was leaving a friend's home when Bonin abducted him. He was bound, beaten, sodomized, and suffered several deep perforating ice pick wounds to the ear and neck. Perforating wounds in this case means that the ice pick went completely through. He was then strangled with a ligature. Ronald's body was found the following day, still bound hand and foot. Victim number 14. On March 21st, a 14-year-old boy named Glenn Barker was hitchhiking to school when Bonin lured him into his van. Barker was beaten, sodomized, and strangled to death with a ligature. His body was dumped near Cleveland National Forest. Victim number 15 happened the same day at 4 p.m. when Bonin abducted a 15-year-old boy named Russell Rue from a bus stop in Garden Grove. Russell was bound, beaten, and sodomized for an estimated 8 hours before he was strangled to death and his body dumped alongside that of Glenn Barker's body. 14-year-old Glenn Barker and 15-year-old Russell Rue's nude bodies were found on March 23rd. While observing Glenn's body, there were numerous cigarette burns on his neck, which to police suggested a second killer was involved. Foreign objects were also inserted into Glenn's rectum, so much so that his rectum was extensively distended, or in layman's terms, his butthole was extremely stretched out. This would have been very painful for the poor 14-year-old boy. So it is possible that Butts or Miley assisted with both boys, or at least one of the boys. The next murder surprises me because his accomplice was William Pugh. This is the boy from episode 1 that was told by Bonin that he would have killed him if they weren't seen leaving a party together. So why did he go with Bonin this time? Bonin did give Pugh some murder advice, I guess. Did he think about this and after talking with Butts and Miley decided he too wanted to murder? I would think that he would have stayed far away from Bonin given the circumstances of their first encounter. I just don't know. But this is victim number 16. On March 24th, A 15-year-old boy named Harry Todd Turner, who ran away from a boys' home just 4 days before, was spotted by Bonin and Pugh. The poor kid had the worst timing. Bonin and Pugh lured Harry into the van with an offer of $20 for sex. After binding, sodomizing, and biting the boy, Bonin ordered Pugh to beat him up because he was exhausted already by the assault. After Pugh had bludgeoned Harry to the head and body for several minutes, Bonin then strangled the youth to death with his own t-shirt. Then they discarded his body at the rear delivery door of a Los Angeles business. 15-year-old Harry Turner's autopsy revealed that his genitals were mutilated and he sustained 8 fractures to his skull inflicted by a blunt instrument prior to being strangled. Victim number 17. On April 10th, Stephen John Wood, a 16-year-old boy, was walking to school after attending a dental appointment that morning. Bonin abducted him, sodomized, and extensively beat the boy before killing him by ligature strangulation. His body was discarded in an alleyway in Long Beach, close to the Pacific Coast Highway. No clothing or other identifying evidence was discovered at the scene. Next, I am going to read you something that J.J. Maloney wrote, and it was his experience with this case and how he came up with the Freeway Killer and pretty much alerted the community that a serial killer was finally on the loose. In January 1980, I had never heard of the Orange County Register. I had heard of smaller papers and larger papers, but the Register remained anonymous beyond the boundaries of Orange County. A lot of people still prefer to call it the Santa Ana Register because that identifies it with something tangible. For some reason, a county is less tangible than a city, harder to visualize. Anyway, the Register was still a libertarian newspaper, and I was hired and proud of it. Jim Dean was editor, Pat Riley was managing editor, and Marv Olson was metro editor. I worked directly for Marv Olson. The Freeway Killer was my first major assignment. The Register had been following the activities of the killer, but was handling it as a routine police story. In December 1979, Tim Alger, a young police reporter, wrote a piece pointing out that bodies were showing up, always strangled. The police didn't give him much to go on. Some said maybe the killings were connected. Others said maybe not. The question went unanswered. The story ran and died before the ink had dried. Ooh, I like his rhyming style. Alger was on the right track, but the other media did not join in, so the story died. One day I came across an envelope of clippings labeled Dead Gay Boys. These were the boys being strangled. The sparse articles made me wonder where the label came from. A youth found dead and strangled, with no name, no history, no clues to the crime. How do you write him off as a dead gay boy? And why did no one seem to care? No outcry, no task force to catch the killer. At the paper, no one was assigned full-time to pursue the story. There was speculation that the body count was now up to 13. That story ran deep inside the paper. So I think what he means by that is it wasn't like front page news. It was just, somewhere in there. Like, no big deal. I talked to Olson, and he agreed that it could be an injustice to the victims to even unintentionally imply that they were homosexuals, since that might tend to trivialize the crimes. A lot of people would turn up their noses and say, "So what?" One of the victims was a 12-year-old boy who'd disappeared on his way to Disneyland, a little boy who wanted to see Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse, and instead ended up in an envelope labeled Dead Gay Boys. That little boy, James McCabe, was found murdered at a construction site in Walnut on February 6, 1980. His body was tossed into a Dempsey dumpster. He was strangled. His skull was fractured. His penis was bruised. Marv Olson is a father. He sat in the coffee shop of the Register. I told him monsters might be the norm in Southern California, but in other cities a newspaper would assign half the staff to root out the truth. It would be relentless. It appeared certain that a psychopathic killer was on the loose, and that kind of killer, once he starts, repeats and repeats and repeats. One killer, one spree. If the police wouldn't say it publicly, someone had to. Marv agreed, and I was assigned full-time to the story. Alger would cover developments at the police departments and help develop features. It wasn't half the staff, but it would turn out to be enough. It quickly developed that there were many more murders than the newspapers suspected, and that police were trying to keep a lid on the case to avoid another public fiasco, such as had been experienced with the Hillside Strangler case, which had mortified Los Angeles Police Department, who were also involved in this case. I did several episodes on the Hillside Stranglers also, if you're interested. Once the existence of a serial killer becomes known, the public expects the police to do something about the killer. The Yorkshire Ripper in England had ended one chief constable's career. The Chicago Police Department had bungled the John Wayne Gacy case and suffered public embarrassment. The Los Angeles Police Department had pitifully bungled the Hillside Strangler case after spending millions in a fruitless effort to catch the killer, who was finally caught by the tiny police force in Bellingham, Washington. The police naturally do not want the massive public pressure a serial killer brings to bear on them, and there are differences of opinion among policemen on the wisdom of giving out information to the public. At the Register, we felt the public had a right to know. That, more importantly, hitchhikers had a right to know that the next time they stuck their thumb out, they might end up strangled and abused. The police told me that the strangulation of young men was a normal byproduct of the large homosexual community in the Orange County, Los Angeles area. I obtained data on causes of death in California and the nation and determined that the strangulation of males between 12 and 25 is relatively rare. The rate in Southern California between the years 1972 and 1980 was about 15 times the national average. Furthermore, the murder rate among homosexuals was, if anything, lower than the murder rate among heterosexuals. We finally decided to take all of our information and give it to a forensic psychologist or psychiatrist and get a professional opinion on whether the murders were the work of one man. Dr. Albert Rosenstein was that forensic psychologist. I explained to Rosenstein that there were differences of opinion as to whether one killer was responsible for all of the killings, but he insisted that it was one killer. On March 24th, 1980, we broke the story that a serial killer was at work in Southern California. We called him the Freeway Killer. As late as April 1980, when the strangled bodies of young men were popping up with increasing frequency, Captain Walt Ownby of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department said the Freeway Killer was a total figment in the minds of journalists. I believe it was the Orange County Register that started all this, Ownby added. That has built up and created a lot of fear about a killer or group of killers, and there is no evidence substantiating any of that. The Register ground out story after story, day after day. No matter what the police said, the newspaper stuck by its position that a serial killer was preying on young boys in Southern California. The television stations sided with the newspaper, and they began aggressively to cover the story. Schools began to counsel their students not to hitchhike. A large reward was established for information leading to the capture of the killer. Concerned citizens flooded the newspaper and local police department with tips. Finally, the murders were occurring with such frequency that the police quit denying the existence of the Freeway Killer and began to coordinate the activities of the various police departments involved. So that is the story of how the Freeway Killer received his nickname and how the public was alerted of yet another serial killer. Victim number 18. On April 29th, Bonin and Butts were parked in a supermarket parking lot. They lured a 19-year-old employee named Darren Kendrick into Bonin's van on the pretext of selling him drugs. Darren was driven to Butts' apartment where he was overtaken and bound by both men. Darren was sodomized and partially strangled with a ligature, forced to drink hydrochloric acid, which caused caustic chemical burns to his mouth, chin, stomach, and chest. Butts then forced an ice pick into Darren's ear. This caused the fatal wound to his cervical spinal cord. His body was discarded behind a warehouse close to the Artesia Freeway. The ice pick that Butts had driven into his skull was still protruding from his ear. Victim number 19. On May 12th, Bonin woke up and decided to kill 17-year-old Lawrence Sharp that morning because he was, quote, tired of having him around. This leads me to believe that Lawrence was a sex buddy. He was bound, sodomized, extensively beaten, then strangled to death with a ligature. Lawrence's body was discarded behind a Westminster gas station, where it was found on May 18th. Victim number 20. On May 19th, Bonin asked Butts to accompany him on a killing, but this time Butts did not want to go. So operating alone, Bonin abducted a 14-year-old boy named Sean King from a bus stop in Downey. He sodomized and killed him, then discarded his body in Live Oak Canyon. Bonin then went to Butts' house and bragged about killing the kid. 14-year-old Sean King's body was later found only by the assistance of Bonin, who led police to the body in December of 1980. I am going to summarize the next few events. Event 1. By early 1980, the murders committed by the Freeway Killer were receiving lots of media attention and public outcry. So in spring of 1980, a task force from different jurisdictions was formed. They shared evidence and worked as a team to try to capture the Freeway Killer, who at this point was striking at an average rate of once every 2 weeks. Event number 2. In May 1980, Pugh was arrested for auto theft and housed at a juvenile courthouse. There, he overheard the details of the ongoing Freeway Killer murders on the radio. He told his counselor his suspicions of Bonin being the Freeway Killer, of course leaving out the part that he had actually accompanied Bonin on one of his murders. The counselor told the police, who then talked to Pugh and gathered enough information to begin surveillance on Bonin. David McVicker, his last victim to live, had also contacted authorities to report his suspicions that Bonin may be the perpetrator. His suspicions were on the list of one of the many public tips to be investigated. Event number 3. On approximately May 28th, this is when Bonin met the 18-year-old hitchhiker and drifter named James Michael Munro. Monroe was kicked out of his house in Michigan and was living on the streets of Hollywood the past few weeks. Bonin invited Monroe to live with him, which he accepted, and he even got him a job at the same place where he worked. Event number 4. On June 1st, a few days after the pair met, Monroe said that he wanted the two of them to abduct, rape, and kill a teenage hitchhiker. This was probably kind of scary for James, as he himself was a teenage hitchhiker when the two met. Event number 5. Round-the-clock surveillance of Bonin began on the evening of June 2nd. Event number 6. Final victim, number 21. The day after Bonin told Monroe that he wanted to abduct, rape, and kill a teenage hitchhiker together, this being June 2nd now, Bonin and Monroe's workday was over and the pair got in Bonin's van to head home. While heading home, Bonin saw Stephen J. Wells, an 18-year-old print shop worker, standing at a bus stop. Bonin pulled over. Monroe opened the side of the van. Stephen Wells got in and closed the door. Bonin asked him where he was going, and Steve replied, "Oh, I'm on my way home down the street." So as the trio are on their drive, Bonin asks Stephen, "Hey, what do you think of gays?" Stephen replied, "Oh, they're okay because I'm a bisexual." Bonin replied, "Oh, really?" and pulled over. Bonin then told Monroe to drive the rest of the way home as he got in the back of the van with Stephen and started to give him a blowjob. Once at home, the trio got out of the van and went inside, but Monroe decided to run to the store real quick and left, driving the van. He was pulled over by a cop because apparently he was driving in the middle of the road. When the cop asked him why he was in the middle of the road, Monroe's actual statement was, "I dropped some tapes and I am on the way to the store." Since Monroe did not have a California license, he was told to go back home. Once Monroe was back home, Bonin came up to him and asked him if he wanted to come to the bedroom and join in on the fun with Stephen. Monroe told him no and went to the living room to watch TV while Bonin had sex with Stephen. Soon, Bonin came into the living room and told Monroe to follow him. They went back to Stephen. Bonin asked Stephen if he would like to make $200. Stephen said, "Yeah, how?" Bonin told him that he knew a guy that liked to have sex with guys tied up, and Stephen said, "Okay, it could be fun." Bonin then went into the kitchen and got some rope. He came back into the bedroom and tied Stephen up. Then he went back into the kitchen, and this time Monroe followed him into the kitchen. Monroe asked Bonin, "Hey, you ain't going to hurt him, are you?" Bonin replied, "Hey, it's too late. I already got him tied up, so I'm going to kill him." Monroe followed him back into the bedroom, and Bonin jumped on the bed and hit Stephen in the chest and told him he was going to do what he said or he was going to kill him. Stephen cried and pleaded for his life. The following details of the rest of what happened that night are in Monroe's own words, and this is following the incident when Stephen started to cry and plead for his life. Then Bonin told me to go get his clothing. I thought that he was going to give back his clothing and let him go. Little did I know that he was serious about killing him. Bonin took Stephen's t-shirt, put it around his neck, and twisted it until he started to jump around. During all this time, I was right there freaking out because I never saw anything like this before in my life. Bonin ordered me to hold his feet. I did not know why, because I did not know what the hell I was doing until Bonin explained it to me after the murder. Then Stephen stopped moving around and Bonin turned him over and his face was blue. I asked Bonin why his face was blue and he told me it was because he was dead. I said, "Dead? What do you mean dead?" He said, "Hey, relax. You didn't do anything wrong. I'll take the blame if we get caught, okay? Relax." So I started to relax. He took me into the living room. After he took the body, put it in the van, and covered it up with a tarp. When that was done, he told me he was going to wait until it was dark to dump the body and that he wanted to talk to me. I went into the living room with him and we sat down. Bonin told me that he was the Freeway Killer, that he had other partners out there who helped him kill, and that he killed 45 people. I got scared and started to cry again. He came up to me and told me to stop crying because he was not going to hurt me unless I ran or called the police. So we got in the van and drove over to the home of Vernon Butts, his other crime partner in Downey. He was 6 feet tall, white, and must have weighed about 140 pounds. As we went up to the door, we knocked, and Butts came out, dressed in a Darth Vader uniform like the Star Wars movie. We went inside, and Bonin told Butts, "This is Jim Munro, and he is my new partner." Butts said hi and showed me all the people he killed. He showed me a closet containing 21 ID cards of all the victims that he killed. Bonin then told Butts to come look at what we did, so we all went out to the van. Bonin uncovered the body, and Butts replied, "Oh, how nice, you got another one." Then Bonin asked Butts, "Hey, do you want to come with us or do you want to stay here and watch the news?" Butts told Bonin that he would stay at the house. Bonin told Butts if he saw anything on the news to call him. So the pair dumped Stephen's body at an out-of-business Huntington Beach gas station where he was found 5 hours later. Sadly, if the killers had stayed just a little longer at their apartment, they would have been observed by the LAPD detectives who had begun surveillance of William Bonin that night, and there was a chance that they would have been able to save Stephen Wells's life. Shortly after discarding Stephen's body, he and Bonin drove to McDonald's and purchased hamburgers with $10 taken from Stephen's wallet, and Monroe continues. When we got home, we sat down. Bonin was eating a hamburger, looked up in the sky and said, "Thanks, Steve," then looked down and said, "Thanks, Steve," and then looked at me and said, "Wherever you are at," then started to laugh. Then he told me he was getting tired and wanted to go to bed. He went into his bedroom and he got into his bed and I got into mine. Then he turned off the lights. I got up and turned the lights back on and he asked me what was the matter. I told him I did not trust him and I did not want him to kill me. He got up, came over to me and told me, "I know a way you can trust me." He said, "Let me tie you up so you will know that I will not kill you." I let him tie me up the same way that he tied up Stephen. Then he told me that he could kill me, and there was nothing I could do. I started to cry, and I pleaded for my life like Stephen did. He started to laugh and told me that he was not going to kill me, but if I ever ran from him, he would kill me, and that if he could not get me, his partners would. I told him okay, and that I would not run, so he untied me. The next morning, I went to work with him at Dependable Drive-Away Trucking Company, waited until he was on a run, and I took off and ran away to Michigan. I was so scared. I did not want Bonin or his partners to get me. I could not believe what I had gotten myself into. It was like a murder movie, like Friday the 13th, and this time it was for real. I could not get it out of my head. I wanted it to all end, but I did not know how. For the next week, detectives kept a close eye on William Bonin. His activities were pretty unremarkable. He would go to work each day and return home to his apartment late at night after visiting friends around town. 9 days after Stephen Wells's murder, Bonin's sadistic urge to kill was back, and he began looking for a new victim. It is now June 11th, and we are back to where I started in the beginning of episode 1. This is when police surveillance followed Bonin in his van to Hollywood, where he was observed talking to 5 young men standing on the street corner before 15-year-old Harold T. entered his van. Bonin parked with Harold still inside in a vacant lot on Santa Monica Boulevard. Despite Harold's resistance, Bonin orally copulated him. Shortly thereafter, Bonin was apprehended in the act of raping and sodomizing Harold, and they were just in time too, as Harold was about to be yet another victim of the Freeway Killers, and Bonin was arrested. But while in custody, Munro stole Bonin's van and drove it back to his home in Chicago. Okay, I will also summarize the trial and sentencing for each killer or people involved in this story, or else it would get extremely lengthy. We'll start out with Vernon Butts. In July, police arrested 22-year-old Vernon Butts, charging him as an accomplice in 6 of the Freeway murders. Fearing the death penalty, he began to tell police of the other accomplices, James Michael Monroe and Gregory Miley. Butts later claimed to have both been fascinated with and terrified of Bonin, while freely admitting to taking a great delight in watching Bonin abuse and torture his victims. Despite claiming in his formal confession to investigators shortly after his arrest that he had basically participated in the murders out of fear of Bonin, Butts also informed investigators he had considered the killing spree a good little nightmare, adding that Bonin really loved those sounds of screams. He loved to hear them scream. He loved every minute of it. Butts hanged himself while awaiting trial on January 11th, 1981. He left no suicide note. At the time of his death, he had been scheduled to be tried on July 27th for 6 of the murders he had accompanied Bonin upon. Correspondence found within his cell indicated Butts had been greatly distressed at the impending release of a transcript of evidence he had given behind closed doors at his preliminary hearing days prior, and the effect it would have on his friends and relatives. His suicide caused his recorded testimony in 3 cases to be inadmissible as evidence. William Pugh. Through questioning Bonin's neighbor Everett Frazier, police discovered that 17-year-old William Ray Pugh, who had informed police that he suspected Bonin of being the Freeway Killer, actually knew Bonin much better than he had initially divulged. Police later learned Pugh had willingly accompanied Bonin on the murder of Harry Todd Turner. Pugh was found guilty of the reduced charge of manslaughter and innocent of robbery and sodomy. Pugh served less than 4 years of his sentence and was released from prison in late 1985. Gregory Miley. Miley was arrested in Texas on August 22nd, 1980, he was charged with the murders of Charles Miranda and James McCabe. He was sentenced to a term of 25 years to life on February 5th, 1982. This sentence was for the first-degree murder of Miranda, and Miley was informed that he would need to serve a minimum of 16 years and 8 months before he would be considered for parole. He was later sentenced to a consecutive term of 25 years to life by an Orange County judge for the abduction and murder of James McCabe. Initially incarcerated at the California Substance Abuse Treatment Facility in state prison, Miley was later transferred to Mule Creek State Prison. Throughout the years of his incarceration, Miley was repeatedly reprimanded for violating prison rules. These accrued reprimands had included the possession of contraband drugs and attempting to sodomize fellow inmates. On May 25, 2016, Miley died of injuries that he had sustained 2 days prior when he was attacked by another inmate in an exercise yard at Mule Creek State Prison. James Munro. Monroe was arrested in Michigan on July 31, 1980, after stealing Bonin's van to flee. Monroe was sentenced to a term of 15 years to life for the second-degree murder of Stephen Wells on April 6, 1981. Monroe has repeatedly appealed his sentence, claiming he had not known Bonin had been the Freeway Killer until after Stephen Wells's murder, and that he had been tricked into accepting a plea bargain whereby he pleaded guilty to the second-degree murder charge. He has also written to successive governors requesting that he be executed rather than spend the remainder of his life behind bars for what he claims is a crime I did not commit. And he also complains that he hasn't had a decent night's sleep since he entered prison. Now on to William Bonin, or Bonin. His trial began on November 5, 1981 in Los Angeles County. Here he was charged with the murder of 12 of his victims, the victims who were murdered within the county jurisdiction. Vernon Butts, Greg Miley, and James Munro testified for the prosecution. They spelled out details of the torture suffered by assorted freeway victims, the glee with which Bonin inflicted pain, and the roles each of them played in the commission of these atrocities. In return, Butts, Miley, and Monroe drew life sentences in return for their testimony against Bonin. On January 5, 1982, after 8 days of deliberation, jurors convicted Bonin on 10 counts of murder and 10 of robbery. He was acquitted in the deaths of Thomas Lundgren and Sean King. 2 weeks later, he was formally sentenced to death. About 1 year later, he was convicted in Orange County of the other 4 murders for which he received a second death sentence. On February 23, 1996, William George Bonin was executed by lethal injection at San Quentin State Prison. Bonin was the first to be executed by lethal injection in the history of California. Bonin's family refused to claim his remains in the weeks following his 1996 execution. His remains were cremated in a private ceremony with no family members present, and later his ashes were scattered over the Pacific Ocean. Bonin never expressed remorse for what he had done. Once confronted with the evidence, Bonin freely confessed to police concerning the crimes for which he was charged, as well as to those that law enforcement knew nothing of. Bonin confessed to killing 21 young men and boys, though officials cite that through blood and semen stains, as well as hair and carpet fibers, the number of deaths for which he is responsible may possibly be double that. He shared aspects of each crime in horrifying detail. After his arrest, Bonin told a reporter, "I'd still be killing. I can't stop killing. It got easier each time." It would later be learned that Bonin drove to Orange County every day to buy the Register, and remember the Register was the paper. Part of the evidence that would be developed against him came from the fact that he took the story from the March 24th, 1980 edition, in which many of the Freeway Killer's victims were identified, and pointed to each of the boys he had killed and admitted to one of his accomplices that he had committed those murders. Bonin avidly collected the newspaper clippings documenting his own manhunt and supposedly showed it off to his accomplices. David McVicker, the youth who had survived the 1975 assault and partial strangulation at Bonin's hands, and who personally witnessed Bonin's execution, was initially traumatized by his experience and never discussed his ordeal in detail with his family. In the years immediately following his ordeal, McVicker was haunted by nightmares, dropped out of high school, and began abusing drugs and alcohol. Nonetheless, he described the experience of observing the execution as being symbolic of closure and the beginning of my life. Alice Bonin, William's mother, got in trouble as she deposited about $75,000 worth of her son's Social Security disability checks, which were given to him for a mental condition. These checks were supposed to stop coming once he entered prison, but they did not. Bonin also confided the following to a Fresno-based reporter named David Lopez, that he was indeed the Freeway Killer and that he had killed 21 victims, that the youngest victim, 12-year-old James McCabe, was the easiest victim to kill, and Bonin's primary incentive for revealing the location of Sean King's body to authorities had been the knowledge that police would purchase hamburgers as they searched San Bernardino County for his remains. In a minimum of 12 of the murders, he was assisted by one or more of his 4 known accomplices. He also said that although he resented the thought of being executed, he had opted to kill repeatedly simply because he had enjoyed the sound of kids dying. And that, my friends, is the story of William George Bonin and his evil minions. If you want this show to continue, please rate me not just stars, but also written reviews on Apple Podcasts. I would very much appreciate it, and put the links in my show notes. Please also check out my YouTube page and my IMDb page. I think it's really stupid how IMDb works. It updates weekly, and the more people who had clicked on your page and stuff, your score goes lower, which is better, but it can be so easily manipulated. It's just stupid. And I think I'm just going to start making my own films, so if you live in the Oklahoma City area and you might be interested, just email me at truecrimeandcoke@gmail.com. Until next time, have a good evening, or if you're named Steve, have a good Steve-ning.